All right, what's happening with the Black family? Black History Month this month. Happy Black History Month to everybody. And for Black History Month, we are going to have to tap back into our history. You're going to see a lot of disrespectful stuff during Black History Month. A lot of times when it's our time to celebrate and honor our ancestors, um, you get healing from studying who created you. You get healing seeing what they go through, what they went through, just for you to exist and be alive today. So whenever that happens, you're going to have white supremacists try to dilute that energy. They're going to try to tame that energy, pour some water on the fire. On MLK Day a few weeks ago, it was just so much nonsense on TV. They Every time they kept bringing up honoring MLK Day, they tried to bring up something about the vaccine and talking about how MLK would want people to be vaccinated. It's like, what? Like, there's no telling that MLK would have been for that. MLK was against most of the stuff U.S. was doing. He was against the slavery. He was against the segregation. He was against the wars. He wasn't really supportive too much of what America was doing at all to say that he was going to be in support of vaccines and the forced nature of vaccines on people. Um, so, so on MLK Day out here in Sacramento, they were talking about South Sacramento and how this is the highest rates of COVID in the city, and they're showing all these poor black people, and they're showing black people walking to the bus and stuff like that. Like, they're showing stuff like that, and then they have all these white and Asian people talking about at the bottom of the screen. It says honoring MLK Day, but they have all these whites and Asians talking about how important it is for people to get vaccinated. I'm like, what did that have to do with honoring MLK Day? This is MLK Day we're talking about. And the mayor of Sacramento was out there, Mayor Steinberg. He was out there talking about, we're trying to realize Dr. King's dream and all this nonsense. Just very disrespectful to MLK, very disrespectful to Dr. King, very disrespectful to us and our culture and our holiday and us honoring our people. They did the same thing on Juneteenth. They tried to make Juneteenth this big LGBT celebration, where it's like LGBT had nothing to do with what we went through for strictly because of blackness. And that's one thing I always stress to my black brothers and sisters, is that what we went through specifically because of blackness, nobody else can claim that. And that's the problem. Everybody else who, if you're going to claim any type of oppression, you have to measure it in terms of the oppression black people went through. Black people went through the worst form of oppression known in history. The worst form of oppression known in history, and it went longer than anybody. Some people might say, hey, well, I went through something for this year, these couple of years, or for a couple of generations. We've been going through something for centuries, and we are still going through it. We are still going through it, okay? And one thing I want you all to do for Black History Month is read slave narratives. A lot of people will argue with you about stuff about reparations. Black people don't deserve reparations. Black people only deserve reparations in the form of education or free education or stuff like that. When you read slave narratives, the slave narrative of Maddie Jackson, the slave narrative of Harriet Jacobs, the slave narrative of Sojourner Truth, when you read the narratives from the slaves themselves, slaves who were not allowed to read and write, but still taught themselves how to read and write, still wrote down the experiences they were having at 8 years old, 12 years old, 15 years old, 19 years old, talking about getting beat by the mistress, talking about the master coming in and raping them, and when they had the child and they realized that it was the master's child, then the mistress would be mad and force the woman to kill the baby. You feel what I'm saying? The slave narrative of Harriet Jacobs, she talks about, look, she was like 10 years old. Her mother brought her a new pair of shoes because it was snowing. She had no shoes. She brought a new pair of shoes. The mistress saw her with new shoes, made her take them off, and made her walk all the way to the store in the snow. The slave narrative of Mary Prince, where she talks about, hey, whenever the master got mad at me, she would just strip me naked, tie me up to a tree, and leave me there for a day, sometimes 2 or 3 days. At 12 years old. The dude, yeah, you read from your ancestors' perspective on white people, read your ancestors' perspective on slavery, read your ancestors' perspectives on Christianity. Harriet Jacobs talks about, she says, look, we used to have food ready when our master and his wife got home from church. If the Sunday dinner wasn't ready directly at 6 o'clock, let's say we brought the food out to the table at 6:01, the slaves were only allowed to eat whatever they didn't eat. So after she was done eating the food, she would spit in all of the bowls and all of the pots and pans so that the food that the slaves were given to eat would have her spit in it. You see what I'm saying? They would do stuff like burn the children. They would do stuff like throw oil on them. I mean the stuff that was happening to us in slavery. When you read from the slaves' perspectives, I talked to some black people, and then I ask them this question. I say, "What slave near? What You're telling me that black people, well, we wouldn't even know what to do with reparations, or we wouldn't even know what to do with all that money or something like that. That's slave talk. That's a slave talk. That's a slave mentality talking." You ask a black person, what was the last slave narrative you've read? You're talking with white people, you're talking with Asians, you're talking with your history professor, you're talking about black history and all stuff. Have you read from the slaves in their own mouth, firsthand experience of what they thought? Have you read from the slaves, firsthand experience of what they endured and what they dealt with? They talk about all the illegal things that would happen. A slave master might promise and say, "Hey, I'm gonna sell you, I'm gonna free you once I die. Once I die, you'll be free." And then the master would die, and maybe the master's brother would be like, "Oh, we're not gonna honor that. Well, yeah. He said you were gonna be free, but we're not gonna honor that. We're about to sell you and get $700 for you. And then your children, they're gonna get sold out of state." Dude, this was common stuff, dude. And you know what? As a matter of fact, Harriet Jacobs, that slave narrative, that's gonna be reading. That's the Black History Month homework for everyone on here on Keys Ministry. That go type in the incidents in the life of a slave girl. That's gonna be mandatory reading homework on Keys right now for Black History Month. Read that slave narrative of Harriet Jacobs. Type in the slave narrative of Harriet Jacobs, incidents in the life of a slave girl. She writes about her experiences in slavery up to, I think, 25, 26 years old. She ended up getting free. A white woman ended up helping her get free. But see, you got to understand, when you read the slave narratives, you're going to understand that what we're dealing with today, we're still viewed as slaves in the mind of a white supremacist. Right? We're not talking about your good white friends. We're talking about you are still viewed as a slave by the people in power to exercise power over you, that has your group of men being the number one group of men imprisoned. You either have to admit that you are more criminal than other people, even though you're only 12 or 13% of this whole population, or you have to admit that there's a system set up and designed against you and your people. Right? In slavery, man, there were all different types of slaves, man. You had different... We're talking Black history. It's Black History Month. We're talking about Black history. You had slaves who were on plantations, like my ancestors who got freed in Texas. They were on a plantation with about 400-something slaves. So that's almost like an Amazon warehouse. All the slaves get up at a certain time. The slave master didn't even know all of his slaves, right? He didn't even know all the slaves that were working for him. It was just go out there on that rice plantation and work. Go out there on that sugar plantation and work. Go out there on that cotton plantation and work. It wasn't so much about of individual relationships. There were other slaves who actually were brought out to certain families, and all they knew their whole life from birth to death was this one plantation and this one white family that they had to serve. You had grown adults, you had grown women and men being sold to 4 and 5 year old white girls, 4 and 5 year old white boys, and the parents would teach their children how to dominate the black people because they were just considered niggers, right? This is what the children would call these adults. This is the way of slavery. And these people, these ancestors of ours who wrote down what they experienced, I'm so thankful they did, because that gives us our strength. It gives us our... You read about what they went through, you're not going to have no problem getting up and going to work. Do you feel what I'm saying? you're not going to have a problem fighting through whatever you're having to fight through, because you're going to understand the strength of your people and your ancestors, and that they went through even worse than you ever could go through today in 2022. Dude, I was reading the slave narrative. The master was making the master had the slave cook cook a meal for the dog, and the dog didn't want to eat the meal. So the master choked the cook. Just choked the cook. Killed him. Killed the cook. Right? And all the slaves are watching this, right? I told you, moms, this was a common thing in slavery, was many of the children on the plantation were sons of the slave master. If you were a black girl in slavery, you were just getting raped. Rape was just that was your highest purpose, was to reproduce children. So you were just getting raped by white men, Right? I know, dude, some of the slave narratives I read, I have to read them in parts. I'm like, okay, I read 2 pages and that's enough right now. I'm not going to be able to read the rest of that till another week or so, right? Because sometimes they're explaining their experiences and you're just like, I can't even imagine this. I read a slave narrative where a man, they speak of, because the slaves, they're talking about their experience on day-to-day basis, and they understood anything I do could be punished. A white man can just accuse me and say I did something and I get 50 lashes. A white man can just accuse me and I get put in they used to put the men in these boxes after they got whipped, after they got beat, and they're bleeding all the way down. They wouldn't even take care of the men. They would expect the black woman to go and do that, and the black woman would. This is why black women been with us. They had all types of stuff where it was like they would put these men in these boxes as punishment, and sometimes the rats would come and just eat the people alive. I know it's tough. This isn't the only part of Black history, but you got to tap into the lows of Black history. You got to tap down into the lowest part of Black history, the part of Black history you don't want to remember, the part of Black history you don't want to know, because that's what you bounced back from. That's if you can understand your lows, you're gonna go high. But stop. We listen about slavery from white people. White people put out Black history documentaries. White people put out slave movies. White people put out it's white funded movies all the time about slavery. It's white funded movies or museums all the time about plantations in the South. There's always some white funded stuff. When you read what the actual slaves wrote about themselves and about their slave masters, you're going to be like, oh yeah, give me reparations. Give me reparations immediately, free education, free health care because we were tortured. The slaves talk so much about how many of the slaves were just brought to be experimented on, man. They would buy slaves just to experiment on them. Doctors would buy slaves just to do experiments on them with their body and their privates, and do all types of torture to them. You'll also when you read the slave narratives, you'll also see how much slavery was a community. It was a community agenda. The preachers, the doctors, the store clerks, the school teachers, the engineers, everybody was just okay with it. It was, you were somebody's property, so even if they disagreed with how you were being treated, they legally didn't have no right to be like, well, I can stop this because legally you're his property. This was the mindset of these people, and you have to understand, white supremacists were moving through the world with a manifest destiny mindset. So because they were moving with a manifest destiny mindset, they believed that they were the saviors of the world. They believed that God had given them authority and right to go and convert people. This is why you're going to, as Black Christians, you really have to consider what of Christianity you take and what of Christianity you don't take. How much do you enforce your God and your religion on somebody else? To what point do you stop doing that? Because really, you're only told to let your light shine. You're not told to go and force anybody to anything. White people had that mentality. They said, hey, if all of these people weren't practicing Christianity like us, then we're actually helping them. We're actually a savior. We're actually Christ to these people. We actually are sacrificing our well-being to help these poor black people. Right? So in order for slavery to exist, they had to promote propaganda. They had to promote propaganda about black people being cannibals, black people killing each other. Something came out in the Columbus Day, Christianity Today, talking about Columbus Day last year, a few months ago, talking about the black Native Americans, the indigenous Americans, they were close to extinction because they were all eating each other. Huh? What? That was in the Christianity Today paper. They were saying that's the truth. Christopher Columbus really came over here to help them, and it actually helped. The natives were actually helped by the presence of the Europeans. The Native Americans been on this land for before time. We know, before history, we know Native Americans have been here. Black Native Americans have been here. People have been here since before they even know. There's stuff on this land, artifacts on this land, artifacts all over Mexico, artifacts in the Grand Canyon, artifacts in Oklahoma, Mississippi, all up the Mississippi River. There's all types of signs and symbols where it shows, hey, there were people around here in the ancient ages. We're talking about before just BC times. We're talking about way back in millenniums. Right? And you being a black indigenous person, a black person coming out of slavery, you're mixed in with that group. Black history, man. Black history, man. We have to take pride in it, take hold in it. And I don't say these slave narratives for you to get discouraged. A lot of times when you see something on slavery, it kind of depresses you or whatnot. Not the slave narratives. The slave narratives, you're going to realize how intelligent your people were. Harriet Jacobs talks about one thing. She says, hey, we are able to understand a room and understand everybody's intention in the room before they even understand it. Because their life was dependent on how a white person responded to them, what they did, how they had to negotiate with white people at different times to maybe get a few more minutes. They had to cover for different people who ran away. If someone ran away, the slaves left back at the plantation were going to get beat or going to get tortured until they told something. So they had to have all types of intelligent plans for how they had to operate and move around certain people. They had to plan stuff based off the slave master leaving for a day. It was all types of intelligent stuff. They taught themselves how to read and write even though it was illegal. The slaves were teaching themselves how to read and write even though it was illegal, man. And then that was one of the greatest joys of slave, because imagine you're a slave and you don't know how to read. So you're walking around, you see the paper, but you don't know what the paper's saying. You hear people talking about the Civil War, but you don't really know what's going on. So the slaves who learned how to read, they were actually considered more valuable on the plantation to the other slaves, because they could go into the kitchen, look at the paper and be like, oh, Nat Turner just happened yesterday night. Let me go back and warn the slaves that there's about to be a riot. Hide whatever little money you have or whatever little weapons you have or whatever. Hide all that stuff because there's about to be a riot. If you're a person who can read, you can be like, oh, I see Master's schedule. He'll be gone from Friday to Monday. That's going to be a good time to run. You see what I'm saying? The difference between reading and not reading as a slave was amazing. And I always hear people talk about our ancestors died for the right to vote. I haven't really read those stories. I haven't really read too many of those stories. I know they existed. I haven't read too many of those stories. I've read a lot of stories of slaves dying over the ability to read. I've read a lot of stories about slaves being abused to the point, close to the point of death, for learning how to read. I've read stories of people who get their eyes their eyes taken out because they learned how to read. A black man or woman who reads is very dangerous. A black man or woman who is intelligent and knows how to read, the intelligence goes through the roof knowing how to read. And now you don't really hear that. You don't really hear black people say, hey, you gotta read today. You gotta read today. Your ancestors died for the right for you to read. Yeah, your ancestors died for the right for you to read. You should definitely read today. And you should read these slave narratives. Like I said, the homework for Black History Month, we're gonna read the slave narrative of Harriet Jacobs. That's the one I want y'all to read. That's a great slave narrative. There's a whole bunch of them. I'm constantly reading these slave narratives, so I'm always aware of what my ancestors felt about different situations that happened to them. They were very aware that they were oppressed. They were very aware that the Christianity that these slave owners were practicing was not a true form of God. It was not a true image of God. They understood that. They were not playing. There's so many revelations you'll have when you read the slave narratives from actual slaves. From actual slaves. Read those slave narratives. And that's the part of history, that's the part of slave history that you cannot depend on public schools, churches. Churches should, but and white movies and white media are never going to tell you slavery from the slave's perspective. Okay? They're not going to give you slavery from. There's no mandatory reading of a slave narrative when you're learning Black history. I asked my brother about school today. I said, did they talk about anything with Black history the first day of the month? He was like, no, just European stuff. They just talk about European stuff. You know, nothing for Black history. You can't depend on white people to teach you anything. Why would you even want white people to teach you stuff? Now, you'll learn a lot from what white people say. You'll learn a lot. White people might drop something on you that you're like, oh, I never even knew that, but thanks for sharing it with me. But you don't need them to teach you your history. They can never understand. The slaves in their narrative said these people can never understand us. They cannot understand us. They cannot understand what we have to do behind closed doors. The ways the slaves were viewed was a piece of property to be used 24/7, whether it was being raped, whether it was just little stuff like, oh, I don't like what dress you're wearing. Take that dress off. You're walking around the house naked today. Dude, if a baby was born and they didn't like the way the baby looked, they just were going to sell the baby. A mother just birthed a baby, and that baby gets taken from her and sold. She just birthed the baby. So her whole 9 months, she's not even looking forward to the joy of having the baby. There were so many mothers who tried to kill themselves and their baby in pregnancy because they said, hey, I don't want my baby to go through this. Especially if my baby's a girl. I don't want my baby to go through this. I'm going to die and my baby's going to die. Dude, our people are different people, man. We're a reset group. We were bred different. And I want y'all to understand this. This is the last thing I'm going to say on this video. This is just Black History Talk number 1. This is number 1. We're going to do a lot of Black History Talk this month. But the last thing I want to say is the black family has been under attack since slavery. You know, a white man would have sex with a black woman, and the black woman was not allowed to let her husband, her black husband, know. There was no family ties. You really weren't bonded in marriage, so you weren't allowed to let your husband know. If you let your husband know, the master would probably sell you, because the master doesn't want the man to know, hey, I had sex with your wife. Sometimes they would do it publicly, but a lot of times it would be secrecy, because the master didn't want his white wife to know he was having sex with them, even though she kind of knew. You got to read these slave narratives, man. These black people were highly intelligent. Their life depended on their intelligence. They knew how to deal with different herbs in the woods and how to deal with how to read different signs. They thought different because their life depended on it. And one thing I always encourage black people is, a lot of black people, they're afraid of losing money. Our ancestors were making it through slavery without money. They knew how to live and survive through something, and how to influence situations without money. They were not allowed to have money. Some of them weren't even reading or writing, but they knew how to influence situations without money. So I want y'all to read the slave narrative of Harriet Jacobs. She writes about her experiences as a girl, teenager, early 20s. A lot of times we hear it from older people. That's a great time frame to read, is how a young person was realizing slavery. She talks about her brother one time. Her brother, white boy, I guess he was sold to a white boy who was like 10 years old, and he had a white friend come over, and he was like, hey, he's like, look, I'm gonna beat my slave. Like, he wanted to show off to his friends, so he wanted to beat the black slave, and he resisted. The black man resisted. He's like, I'm not about to let this little 10-year-old child whip me. And then he had to go on the run because he resisted. You understand what I'm saying? The white supremacists who were enslaving us, it was a show for them. It was, you've all seen some crazy white people do some stuff where you're like, man, does this person even have human spirit in them? Like, how could you do that to? I remember as a child one time. I remember as a child, I was with these white boys and we was catching like tadpoles, and so we catching the tadpoles, but this one white guy was just like trying to kill the tadpoles, and like he thought it really funny to kill and watch these tadpoles die. And I'm looking at this kid like, I'm just talking about the culture. I'm talking about the nature of their spirit of to control someone and dominate someone. And when you really start reading these slave narratives and start reading of the stuff that happens as these people are on their way to church, then you'll understand what I'm talking about when I talk about white people's Christianity, and we're still dealing with stuff like Harding University today can't take a name off of a building that reflects a man who was promoting segregation. So you're going to understand, oh, these white people are still on the nonsense. They are on the same stuff they was on in the 1700s and the 1800s. Their culture hasn't changed. Everything that they've changed and adjusted to, they were forced to do, and they're still rebelling against that force. Okay? So I think that's enough for today. You all, Black History Month this month, the reading for Black History Month is to go and read the slave narrative. You can probably get it on Google. I have the book. I have the book on Kindle. You can get it on Kindle probably for way cheaper. If you want to buy the actual hard copy, you can do that. But you can probably find it on Google. You probably can find a PDF form on Google, or just go ahead and buy it from Kindle. And the slave narrative of Harriet Jacobs, I think it's like 25, 20. I think it's like 40 chapters. But by the time you get to chapter 2 or 3, you're going to be like, hold on, let me take a break. Hold on a second. This was happening in slavery. Why ain't this talked about? Then you're going to think differently about reparations. You're like, wait, hold on a second. We don't owe these people nothing. We don't owe these people nothing. It's not about me working hard enough and stacking up my little chips to do better, or I just needed to be more educated, or I just needed to be nicer to white people. You're going to understand that it's not nothing that you can do to appease these white people. Not white supremacists. You had slaves working 50, 60, 70 years for a slave master, and at the end of their life, they're like, hey, I've served you faithfully. I have money where I can pay for myself. I'll pay for my own freedom. And they're like, no, I'm going to give you as a gift to my great niece who's 8 years old. And you're a 70-year-old black woman. And you being given as a gift to an 8-year-old. And your children, and your children's children. Like, yeah, I want her to get used to start having slaves around. You understand me? So, yeah, we are different people. White people know more of this history than a lot of black people. A lot of black people, we don't want to read that stuff. I used to be in downtown Seattle Library up there off of 4th Avenue, and I would be up there reading the slave narratives and the slave history records, and it was all white men up there. It was all white men up there trying to find the slaves that their ancestors owned, trying to find where their great-great-grandfather had his slaves and everything. They're trying to find those people. They learn where the slaves are today. They when they know who the slaves were, they can trace the descendants down and be like, oh, these are descendants of my father's slaves. They can find that the same way I can find certain descendants of my former slave masters, my family's former slave masters. I can find their descendants today too, living in Texas, living well, right? So we got to tap into our history. Your strength is in your history, and not the history you're going to see on TV. On TV this Black History Month, you are going to see a lot of vaccination talk. You are going to see a lot of immigration talk. And you're going to see a lot of nonsense. A lot of black people just some nonsense. You're going to see nonsense when it comes to black history. You're not going to get no slave narrative of Harriet Jacobs. You're not going to get no Maggie Walker, the first woman to run a bank in this country. You're not going to get Sojourner Truth. You're not going to get the truth of Harriet Tubman. And then people who are outside of the black descendants of slaves, those of us who descend from the slaves in this country, you don't learn history from anybody. When you go and take a civil rights class at school and college, I used to deal with so many people who came out of a civil rights class and they try to tell me about, well, 30% of the slaves, whenever you start dealing with a black person or a non-black person who starts giving you statistics on slavery, you give them a slave narrative to read. You say, oh, that's a nice statistic. Oh, 45% of the slaves were real fed. Let me tell you about my ancestors. I got my own ancestors' writings. Do you understand what I'm saying? I can give you my own ancestors' writing where they talk about, hey, look, yeah, we were enchained at night. We had to be up before sunrise. We had 4 days off of a year. You understand what I'm saying? If we did this, if we looked in the eye of this person, we got beat. If the food was too cold, we got beat. If we ended up having a baby for the master, we got beat. You understand what I'm saying? Like, beatings was a common thing. Killings were a common thing. It was so many rules and laws where you could just kill your property and then replace it. So your strength is in your history, and that's what they do not want you to know. I study this stuff, man, and I'm encouraging you all to really study your ancestors' history. Read from their own pen what they wrote about their experiences. Do not read and listen to white people talking to you about, well, if we did reparations, we couldn't do this, and what we couldn't do and what we can't do. Yeah, we gonna get it done. That is in the making. That is going to happen. All right. So Black family, stay up and stay encouraged this Black History Month. Tap into your Black history. Tap into your Black history, and don't just be fed what they're gonna feed you on TV. Don't just be fed what they're gonna give you on social media. Don't just be fed any of this type of stuff. Like I said, MLK Day out here, they had a big vaccination clinic for the Black area of Sacramento. I was like, this had nothing to do with MLK Day. It's getting people vaccinated. Give us our reparations. Give us our health care. Give us our free health care that we should be having. We have been traumatized as a people, and you'll understand that when you read more of your ancestors' narratives. You'll understand how traumatized we were. Traumatized by white people. This is why a white person can walk in a room today and change the whole nature and dynamic of all the black people in the room, because we were traumatized by their culture. Some of the stuff we had to see our mothers go through, some of the stuff we had to see our fathers go through and our children go through, those things can't be left out of the genetic memory. All right. Black History Month. The Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs. Go look that narrative up and start reading on that today. All right. I'll be back on here with y'all soon. Blessings to everyone. If y'all are supporting this channel, hit the Cashapp, Stanman916. Definitely, that's in the description box. And also email me. I appreciate the emails that I receive. I appreciate everyone who talks to me about these videos. White people talk to me about these videos. I don't know how they find the videos because I don't promote it to white people, but they find the videos somehow. But I appreciate all my brothers too. All my brothers, my biological brothers, but also my brothers around the country. My brothers out there in Atlanta, my brother out there in Memphis, Jeremiah, my brother out there in Texas. All of them who are supportive of me and been here from the beginning with this Keys ministry. We are the ones, black men are the ones who are going to have to fight against black men. You don't have no one else to look to. You can't look to Asian men. Who you going to look to? You going to look to Indian men? You going to look to white men to help you? Who are you going to look to? And then when you look at your own group, are you looking to the children to help you or the women to do more than you? Black men, any situation you do not like with the black race, you are going to be very instrumental, very, very instrumental in pushing that agenda forward. It's white males who are leading the attack against us. It has to be males who respond to that attack. And trust me, women they'll ride with you, man. They'll follow your place. They'll follow your lead. They'll rock with you, whatever you decide to do. They're going to rock with you. As long as you stand on who you are and stand for your people and your culture. You stand for them, your women and children are going to follow you, all right? So I appreciate y'all supporting financially. I appreciate y'all supporting in words and encouragement. We got to keep this thing going. Black men, y'all got to stay. We got to stay in this. We got to stay in this Everyone else will follow, okay? All right, y'all. Y'all be blessed. Y'all be peace. Let's have a great Black History Month. Let's really get into this Black history and really enjoy doing it. I enjoy studying Black history. It's so much to it. And our history is not just the slavery aspect. Our history is actually the it's the greatest story ever told. The people who went from pharaohs and kings and queens and fell down to being less than human. Fell down to where people were taking care of their dogs. They would feed their dog and then give the food that the dog left over to the slave. I don't think y'all understand how bad slavery was. Now you'll have some white person be like, "Well, not all slaves went through that." It don't matter, dude. There's a police officer out here had to give many reparations to someone because he was trying to help the homeless man and he had to tase the dog. The police didn't know that the dog didn't know that the police was helping the homeless man, so he started attacking the police, and the police had to tase the dog. The dog got injured. Now the police has to pay this man out for the dog getting injured, and we still dealing with what we dealing with, wondering if a cop is even gonna go to jail for killing us. Y'all better read history and understand that you are in a war. There is a war against you, and understand that other cultures don't understand that all the way. They understand that white people don't like us, but they don't have the same feeling of warfare against them directly the way we do. We understand these white people very well. We understand white people very, very well, on sight very well. Sometimes without seeing them, we can just understand what we feel. We can read minds like that. All right, y'all. Blessings, blessings, and peace. Happy Black History Month to everyone. Appreciate the support. We're going to keep this thing rolling. All right. Peace.